This is YSM Sports Media. Want to thank you for all your love and support. Really appreciate it. We wouldn't be able to do this without you. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now, then click the notification button for all future content.
All right, so today, when I reached out to you, initially he hadn't won yet. Deontay Wilder wins in arbitration against Tyson Fury. JR, you want the first question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I could have like followed up with the questions as far as like being in law school and dealing with case law and things like that. But we'll get in the whole thing with arbitration. So when it comes to like that particular term, could you expound on that a little bit as far as like what the process is when two separate parties go into arbitration?
Yep, perfect. So I've done hundreds of arbitrations, right? 6-figure, 7-figure arbitrations. And so usually in an arbitration, it's something that's agreed to in the contract, right? So in this particular contract between Wilder and Fury, there was probably an arbitration clause that basically said that the remedy, if there's any kind of dispute, the remedy isn't going straight to federal court or state court. It's going to be an arbitration between the parties. And even like within the NFL, if you have an issue with your client or your client has an issue with you, or you have an issue with another agent that's tampering, then everything with the NFL usually goes to arbitration through Roger Kaplan. That's their arbitrator that they use to resolve, the disputes when guys test positive for substances, when guys are suspended, agent fee disputes, right? And so in this particular instance, this was in the contract that if there was some sort of dispute, that it will be arbitrated. And what arbitration means essentially is you usually have an arbitrator who is probably a retired judge or a former judge or somebody that has practiced law, for 20 plus years that is, kind of winding down on their way out to retirement. And what they choose to do generally is arbitrate cases. And they usually have a pretty good background or well liked. And so sometimes arbitrators are appointed randomly, like you never know who the arbitrator is going to be. And other times, it kind of comes from a panelist. They might have a list of 3, and you'll get one of the 3. And so in this instance, rather than going to court, they're going to have an arbitrator who's going to pretty much serve as a decision maker, and he's going to listen to the merits on both sides. And one side's going to argue why this arbitration or this rematch, isn't enforceable, and the other side is going to pretty much argue that there's a rematch clause in this contract for a reason and it needs to be honored.
Fred, you go ahead with the next question.
Yeah, it's a rumor going around right now with the whole Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury situation that even though Deontay Wilder won the arbitration, there's still going to be some courts. I think an appeal process that is possible. Could you speak on that?
Yeah. So generally speaking, right, I'd be curious to see actually like the arbitrators, award. Usually they'll do some sort of award where they'll state, this party prevailed. Here's the damages, or here's what the resolution is. But in a lot of states, you can appeal an arbitration clause. But again, I don't know how long that's going to tie things up, right? Because it sounds like Fury's supposed to be having a summer, and with this decision looming over its head right now, I guess if he appeals, does Wilder come back and try to do something like an injunction to basically stop this fight from happening, right? So I would have to see the contract, but for the most part, you usually can appeal an arbitrator's award, but there's usually some sort of consequence if you don't prevail on that appeal, meaning that they might be responsible for Wilder's attorney's fees or things like that. So that's speculative. Again, I haven't seen the contract, but usually in the contract, there will be something that states whether or not the arbitrator's award is appealable.
Okay.
All right. So, Cleo, originally they started with mediation, then it went into arbitration. Is the arbitrator's ruling legally binding?
Arbitrators' rulings usually is legally binding. Mediations generally, any side can walk out, right? So, for instance, I've been in a $5 million mediation where the insurance company is lowballing my client, right? And my client's pissed off because he thinks his case is worth $5 million, and they walk in and offer 750 grand. I've had mediations where we essentially walk out right then and there. So in a mediation, the mediator can't force any party to do anything, right? It's more so let me kind of step in here, see if we can reach a middle ground, something that both parties can live with, and we'll kind of move on from afterwards. Whereas the arbitration, the ruling tends to be, binding. It essentially has, almost the same effect as a judge signing off on an order.
Last question, and then I'm gonna go to you, Jr. If Fury, Bob Arum, Joshua, Eddie Hearn, they go ahead with this fight, can Eddie Hearn and Joshua and all parties involved be sued for torturous interference?
It could be like, up here at least, like intentional interference of a business relationship, meaning that I would say potentially, again, I would have to see the contract, but essentially the claim is that they interfered with, this rematch, right? And so potentially they could be sued. I think there's some different things Wilder can do, and Wilder and his team can do as well too. And so that's why I guess my personal opinion is I don't necessarily think they're going to move forward with that fight as soon as August. I think they want to kind of see how things are going to kind of turn out here. And I think it's going to be interesting to see if we actually get the arbitrators award to kind of see what exactly was stated, right? Because we know a third fight is going to be granted to Wilder. We just don't kind of know when, right? So in in all reality, if the award essentially says that Wilder's granted a third fight but doesn't specify time, I can see a situation where, maybe Hearn and those guys try to backdoor and go ahead and go on with the fight. But if the award essentially says that the fight must happen by this date or this fight must happen immediately prior to the Joshua fight, I definitely think they're putting themselves at risk for being sued if they pretty much ignore the arbitrator's decision.
Uh, I think Jr. September 15th, right, is the date that he has to have his fight by.
I don't know the complete details. That's what's been, kind of like released. There's been other instances where they say that the actual ruling hasn't been put down yet, so that either it could be, a third fight for Deontay Wilder, or it could be something where they come up with a settlement for Deontay Wilder. Now, in the case of, what you were talking about there, Brother Cleo, the thing with Eddie Hearn trying to go forward with that particular fight, would they be, I guess, responsible for it, even though it's a separate party that has to agree towards going forward with that fight?
Well, yeah, I think obviously the easiest recovery is probably going to be off of Fury, right? He's the one who's breached the contract, right? But a lot of times you'll see lawyers if they take legal action, they sue somebody, they essentially sue all the parties involved. It's called avoiding the empty chair, right? So if there's Hearn and Fury and all these different companies, right? Wilder's attorney most likely will sue everybody involved and let them point the finger at each other, right? So, and then from a damages standpoint, I think you were just speaking on, right, is that a lot of people, I think I was reading online, a lot of people were like, well, Wilder might get 5 million or this. Nobody truly knows, right? A lot of times when you have an arbitration clause, your damages are going to be like compensatory, or they're going to be expected to put you back whole, right? So essentially, if let's say Wilder made $25 million last time fighting Fury, right? And this time there's an estimate of $50 million, right? Well, those are going to be the kind of damage that Wilder's going after. He's essentially arguing that, had this fight taken place, this third fight, I would have made X amount of dollars, and that's what I want, right? So it's going to be interesting to see what the arbitrator's opinion is, and if they actually, release the full award. A lot of times they have confidentiality agreements and things like that, so we might get a piece of it, right? But it's going to be interesting to kind of see how it all unfolds.
Yeah, I think that's, part of it as far as like the damages are concerned, because he and his party think about what potentially could have been made for a third fight between him and Tyson Fury. And then on top of that, it could also be future, earnings coming off of that third fight, especially if they don't go forward with it, or if they try not to go forward with that third fight, because it affects his overall value as a fighter.
For sure. No, especially during times like this as a pandemic. I don't think what Wilder hasn't fought in like what a year and a half, and definitely affects his future earnings as a fighter. So it sounds like from everything I read online though is that he's at least been granted that third fight. Now, obviously, again, the big question is when is that third fight supposed to happen?
Okay. Fred, go ahead.
Oh man, you guys literally just answered my next question. But there's been rumors that Tyson Fury said he wouldn't face Deontay Wilder no matter what. So I mean, you guys already talked about the potential damages, but what do you think would happen if he just says I'm not fighting anybody?
I mean, I think so. If he says I'm not fighting anybody, well, I mean, obviously, I think at some point, right, the sanctioning bodies will probably strip him from his belt, but strip him for his belts. But I mean, I guess that's a good question. If he were to essentially, I mean, again, usually if in most states, in most arenas, if you ignore an arbitrator's decision, right, and you're not successful on appeal, then there's going to be some sort of monetary damages. So I can see Wilder's attorney essentially, probably filing like some sort of motion to basically enter judgment of the arbitrator's award and then kind of move forward from there. If there's monetary damages, right, then the attorney essentially would attack that judgment as well too. So I think, knowing Fury, he has this big money fight lined up with Anthony Joshua, probably another big money fight lined up with Wilder. I think he's gonna have to find a way to fight one of these guys. And it sounds like Wilder was unwilling to kind of take that step aside money, which I think I read was millions of dollars, right? And so I think that kind of tells you what Wilder's mindset is that it's not about this $10 million when I probably could have made 3 or 4 times that. I want my belts back, and I want this fight that was agreed to in the contract.
Okay, you answered more, more than all my questions. How do you feel? How do you feel like this is going to play out from a fan's perspective and an attorney's perspective?
Yeah. From a fan's perspective, I mean, I guess speaking on both, I think one of these two fights I think both of these fights are going to happen. I'm just not sure which one's going to happen first, right? I think if Wilder, I think there may be some sort of middle ground if Wilder is able to be guaranteed the winner. If the Joshua and Fury fight was to happen, I think there might be some middle ground if Wilder is guaranteed the winner, if that makes sense, right? Because then he has the opportunity for a big money fight, but also to get all his belts back.
Anybody else have questions?
I mean, I don't have a question on that. I just think this whole situation is just gonna, be a little bit, sketchy here for the next couple of months, because I mean, if you have the WBC title that's, pretty much in limbo with this third fight, as that was agreed to on the contract, and you talk about the money that's involved. It's not, just with the agreements, it's with the organizations that are involved. Disney was involved with, Fury versus Wilder. Multiple organizations within Vegas or anything like that was involved. So yeah, you probably would have had a highly lucrative fight between Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, but you still have to take into account what could have been made between Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder if they would have had that third fight take place by this particular point.
Yeah.
What was it?
I think, especially if Fury and his team aren't happy with the arbitrators award, they do decide to appeal it. I think things are going to be in a limbo for a while. But I think at some point, what usually happens is, there's a middle ground somewhere, and both parties kind of get tired of waiting. And I think they'll get it resolved. I do think it's going to take some time.
I got a question.
Go ahead.
With AJ having his fight supposedly set and all sorted out with Tyson Fury, and now all of a sudden this news comes out that Deontay Wilder wins the arbitration, is there anything legally he can do, him and Eddie Hearn?
Man, that's a good question. My understanding though is that I believe Fury and Joshua agreed in principle, but the latest thing I saw was that no contracts were actually signed. I think that they have the funding put up and they're guaranteed their portion, their persons at least. But I don't think no contracts have been signed. So they have an agreement in principle, but I think because those contracts haven't yet necessarily been signed, and I think the reason why, we've been hearing for a month or two now that they're going to have this fight in this day is going to be in this country, but nothing has ever been nothing official has came out. I think the reason being is they wanted to wait on this arbitration award too. So I don't think those contracts have been signed. And if they haven't been signed, I don't think there's going to be any legal remedy for Anthony Joshua at this moment.
Do you think that Eddie Hearn and AJ, that whole situation with Tyson Fury, do you think that they kind of tried to unofficially make the fight to kind of put pressure on the judge to kind of sway things in their favor?
That's a good point. Strategically, I can definitely see that happening. You know what I'm saying? Because sometimes arbitrators awards. I've been in arbitration before, and it's taken 2 months to get the award, right? So, strategically, I can see that being a standpoint, but I also think Joshua, this is a very lucrative fight. I think they're saying they're both guaranteed $75 million or something like that. So I just think that's a super big, that's a really big fight. It's lucrative for both fighters. It's something that people want to see. So I think regardless, it was going to happen.
Cleo, right? Okay, so they had the rematch clause. The fight was supposed to take place in July, but the pandemic pushed it back to, I think, the clause said October, right? Right, JR? October was the I don't know the correct
that was
term.
the next one.
Yeah. Okay. So and then they decided to push it back in December. How much of a part did COVID play in, even though it technically expired? How much of a part did COVID play in the arbitrator's ruling?
I think it definitely probably played a part, right? Because it's more so like a unexpected event, like a kind of like a natural, I guess, natural disaster, natural event, right? Something that nobody was prepared for, something that nobody could, foresee happening, right? And so if you think about it, right, COVID has shut down businesses, it's closed businesses for good, right? There weren't any fans in the majority of football games, right? The NFL lost hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So, and in boxing, right, it's just now kind of getting back to having fans. And to do a fight of that magnitude with no fans is going to be almost impossible, right? From a money standpoint, right? So I'm guessing that Fury and his team argued that, that the rematch clause is invalid because, it wasn't invoked by these days. And obviously Wilder's team argued that, this is an unforeseen circumstance. It's a natural disaster, and so I think that had a part to play in all of this. I think it was probably highly contested by both sides, but I think most triers of fact are going to understand the effect that COVID's had. Thousands of people have died, people have been hospitalized, right? So I think most triers of fact, in my experience, has been at least in court too, like trial dates are log jam now for 2 years, right? So and I've had some defense attorneys try to force in-person depositions or delay trial because they essentially wanted to do an in-person jury trial, and a lot of courts essentially are realizing uh, how how COVID has affected the world. And so a lot of them are ordering things to be done via Zoom, and they're trying to keep everybody safe. So I think definitely the arbitrator took in the fact that, the world has been shut down for the last, year and almost a year and a half. And that was an unforeseen circumstance. And usually the contracts will have something like that in it. Like I've done work for entertainers. If they have a concert venue or something like that, that concert venue will have a clause that talks about if there's like a natural disaster or earthquake or something like that, and it will state what the remedy is.
Is that term what? Force majeure?
Yep, force majeure. Yep. And so, here, I mean, this was totally unexpected, and everything has been altered, from school to, court hearings, trial dates. I mean, up here in Seattle, at least, man, they're talking about trials. There's going to be like a 2.5, 3 year log jam on trial dates. So we're all trying to figure out how that's going to work.
Well, I'll say that there was like some type of trial date that I was supposed to be involved in, but the lockdown happened pretty much right on that date that I was supposed to go in. So, shoot, I haven't had anything happen since, and it's been over a year. So, yeah, it's going to be a good little while before they even try to catch up with all of the stuff that they have on the dockets.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, right, Fury hasn't fought in a long time either, right? So I think that's even more evidence of the fact how COVID has pretty much slowed down the boxing world, right? None of these big major fights have really, technically happened without fans, right? And strategically, right, you want to get the box numbers and all those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would, I think it would be hard to have a fight of that magnitude with no fans when you're on fighter, those, I guess, those huge purses.
Yeah, and I think that's, one of the points there in reference to the thing with Fury and Wilder is because there was so much involved with the second fight that happened last year. They got to, have something of a similar nature to even try to, pull that fight off. So if they don't have, like you said, everything being safe and everything being fully open, then they can't really attempt to have that particular fight. But if you have those things, like you said, as far as like force majeure and, the natural disaster clauses in the contract, then that doesn't mean that the contract is necessarily void. It just means that, it's going to have to be delayed. So when, like Brother Jamil said, as far as like the fight happening by September 15th, who knows if that's even a guarantee because of, this uncertainty with COVID and what happens with it.
Yeah, well, the wave could come. You just never really know. But I think one thing I was going to tell you guys is a lot of people don't understand. Nobody's really reinventing the wheel with these contracts, right? These promotional companies, and they've been doing this for a long time, right? So they have pretty much airtight contracts, and these contracts pretty much account for anything you can possibly think of to go wrong, right? And so I imagine in this contract there was a force majeure or something that talked about, an unexpected, circumstance like this happening, and if so, what the remedy would be. So this is something that probably, is referenced in the contract somewhat, and I think the arbitrator was able to pretty much look at it and, do some research and, like most triers of fact, understand the effect that COVID has had in the world and how it slowed things down.
Yeah, Cleo, you answered all my questions, man. Anybody got a question for him before he goes?
Is it standard during arbitration for both fighters to have a gag order placed on them?
I wouldn't say it's standard, right? But I would say like usually heading into like any sort of mediation or arbitration, right? Especially something that's high profile like that, right? I wouldn't say it's standard, but I can see why it happens, right? Especially if you kind of caught the drift. I think I saw Fury. I don't know if it was prior to the Canelo fight. Somebody was interviewing him, and he was just like, "You got to talk to my management. I can't speak about that," right? So I think considering this magnitude and all the things that's been saying in the media and the things that have been twisted, I would say maybe it's standard because of who's involved. But in most arbitrations, that's not really, the standard, but normally inside of them, they make you sign like some sort of like confidentiality agreement, something like that.
Okay. And what do you think the penalty would be if someone violated that gag order?
Yeah, usually like at least where I'm at in like state court, there could be some sort of sanctions, some sort of fines. sometimes attorneys will, let's say the attorney was one of the people that were, to kind of break the judge's ruling or the gag order and speak publicly about something, right? Then they'd probably be sanctioned. But for a fighter, it would probably just be a monetary fine.
Okay.
Any more questions?
I'm good, man. He answered everything. It was great, man.
You
I
definitely
appreciate
did. Yo, Cleo, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. I would love to have you back. We can talk football.
For sure. Anytime, man. Just let me know. I appreciate you too.